Right, I'm going to call to order the council workshop for Tuesday, October 29th at 5 o'clock. We have an agenda that's been circulated. Any errors or omissions from the agenda is presented? None. Moved by Councillor Back, second by Councillor Murray. Call the question. All in favor? Reminded. Motion carries. We have a set of meeting minutes that have been circulated October 23rd. Any errors or omissions from those meeting minutes? Hearing none, please move their adoption. Moved by Councillor Murray, second by Councillor Back. Call the question. All in favor? Contrary minded. Motion carries. Okay. The meat of the agenda tonight is the council priorities and budget workshop, which is largely just and
thank you, Your Worship. Good evening, Council and members of the public. This presentation will likely take 15-20 minutes. I can keep it shorter if we like. And before I get started, I just want to ask Mr. Stewart if he has any introductory comments.
I do, and I have another PowerPoint presentation, but goodness knows we don't need another PowerPoint presentation. I'll just make a couple of comments, and I have to be very honest. I was laying in my bed in London. I couldn't get to sleep because I was thinking about
the budget.
Oh no.
So, but I'm glad you're so dedicated to the job. Thank you.
So there's just a couple of promising kind of comments I want to make. There's a lot of things happening in the world, and in a lot of ways, we don't think they affect us. They do. Whether they're at a global perspective or a federal perspective or a religious perspective, all of them impact not only us as an organization, we have a very different perspective, but they affect our residents and they affect their perspective. And so I just wanted to preface this budget discussion with the fact that the matter is that there's a lot of stuff that's happening that's affecting the way our residents perceive us and the impacts that we have. And we just need to keep that in perspective. I'm not suggesting we change course. I'm just prefacing it. So whether it's the contrasting arguments about globalization and protectionism, and those are going to have an effect on us at the end of the day, whether we like it or not. The inflation that we're experiencing is more pronounced at this level because of our reliance on construction. Construction is crazy. So we have that. I'm not going to get into the immigration argument and what that does or doesn't do, but I think council needs to just be aware of some of these conversations. We've had lots of conversations around housing cost and availability, and in particular homelessness. And these are things that we want to control. They're out of our control. They require partnerships to work. And so it's important that council doesn't try to solve all this in an arena that you can't. And you may disagree with me, but I'm really concerned about all the things that we're taking on as a municipality. We really have no control. We had a conversation on transportation. I mean, the real transportation solutions are provincial and federal. They are not local, and so we use them. Some of the things that you might experience, and I know we do as staff right now, is the trust in and reliance on government and institutions is at an all-time low. People have incredible distrust about motive, about interest, all kinds of things. So this is, and I'm sorry I'm saying all this, but it's complicating how we do a budget, because all these things will influence people's perceptions about that budget. We have an incredible move towards social policy, and when I say that, quality, indigenous reconciliation, all that goes kind of thing. And I'm not suggesting at all that those are inappropriate, but they also create a lot of organizational stress in terms of what we can or can't do. I don't need to go into the environment, climate action, all the rest of that, because we've just experienced some of that, and that's going to continue. But we also have labor shortages. It's really hard to get people in the city, getting harder to get people in the North Shore. And I'm sorry I'm belaboring all this point. So this is the environment that we're trying to work in. You have a lot of social pushback and irritability. You've experienced that on the front lines. People are just fed up. You know, they want more. They don't want to pay necessarily. We've got incredible ideological and political perspectives that are really different. Unfortunately, there's not a moving towards, there's a moving apart. And that makes it hard for you. And I'm just trying to explain what I think as a city manager, some of the stuff that we're dealing with. We have the most incredible downloading from senior levels of government that we've ever experienced in 20 years. I mean, I've been a city manager for 30 years now. I've never seen the kind of downloading that we're getting senior levels of government, expecting us to find a way to do that, and we're really, really challenged a lot of things. You've got a health system, we got to have a health system, you know, and we're talking about growth. How are we gonna actually support these people in the health system without the kind of growth that we need? My daughter is an emergency nurse, and I won't even get you to tell you stories she tells me at BGH. The stories that she tells me, I don't even know why she's still in the business. For 3 years, she seems to love it. Technology is outstripping our ability to actually accommodate. Honestly, that's how I feel right now. I mean, we had technology is outstripping our ability to actually accommodate for it. Mike had a comment about AI. You know, the amount of money that we need to spend to keep up with technology, cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Just there's all kinds of it. Is really challenging. And then we have the challenge that we have with information and social media. And I'm not going to get into that because you're all aware of it. But the fact of the matter is, it's not contributing towards bringing us together. It's separate. Sorry, I'm waxing poetically about this, but this is stuff was on my mind in London, so it's on my mind. Your wealth distribution is an issue we're going to have to reconcile with some degree. Yeah, you can only have so many billionaires and the other people. We have a community that's rich. They're struggling with the services they want. And in some cases, the services they want to keep and the services they want to actually increase. And we're going to have a real challenge with that expectation the next 3 or 4 years. I'm telling you, because I think honestly, that we're gonna have to contract as opposed to for a certain period of time. I'm going to add something that's going to be really interesting, and I'm going to talk about global conflict. And I've been doing some. I read a lot. Read probably 10 books a week. And one of the books I've read is about whatever actually happens in real global conflict. And it's not about the soldiers that die in the war, people that die of starvation. And so we're just going to have to be really mindful of because it will impact us even in North America when we're not involved. So I had another little slide, which we don't have to look at, but it's a world with all kinds of arrows going in 15
We have it, it's in here.
It's going in 15 different directions. And that's the challenge, and I hate to say this, council, we're trying to do this in that environment. So anyway.
On that note,
Good luck, Rick.
excellent, yeah. And over to Rick.
No, I'm not finished. I
On
have two
on
other
the
slides. I have
Halloween.
two other slides. When I was involved in Translink, in Translink, but there was a point that I was involved in Translink, and they didn't let anybody from Surrey, Vancouver, Translink staff in the room. And I was the only person servicing the mayor's committee because they wouldn't let anybody else. And one of the interesting conversations I had, and I'm just going to share this with you, is at that point, this goes back to the 70s, okay, that's how long I've been around. It's the whole definition of what is a wicked problem. Have any of you heard of this definition?
Not till I read it.
Yeah, so a wicked problem is it's always complex, right? Social and cultural issues. There's a lack of clarity in terms of what the goals are, and I say this from a societal standpoint. We don't always agree with this. You know, real world constraints, and when I read real world constraints, what can we afford to do as a not afford as a not? They're interconnected, and I would say that our budgets are so interconnected, it's not funny. And you may or may not appreciate that, but the fact of the matter is that our budgets are interconnected, and public opinion. We have multiple stakeholders, and everybody's got an interest. Somebody says do this, somebody says do that. I'll sort of relaxing politically. But the last thing I want to say is one of the definitions of a wicked problem is when you're held accountable for something you have no control. And we're experiencing a lot of that right now. We cannot, as a municipality, dig ourselves out of a lot of problems that in my opinion, the provincial and the federal government and the regional government have responsibility. So I'm just going to conclude. Sorry, Rick. Again, we can nibble at everything. Probably achieve nothing. We can make big decisions, but my experience in that's really, really difficult to do because there's all opposing views. And that's really hard for a local council to do. And this is going to be very controversial. We can make decisions from a populist perspective, which doesn't really, it's who's the loudest voice. And I don't know that that's the best thing for us, because I say that we need to differentiate between needs and wants, and I hear that quite often with council. What's really necessary, what you do. How does science fit in? It's really easy to be populist and not pay attention to the science. And if we're going to get a lot of rain, whether you like it or not, then we're going to get. And then the thing that I find most difficult sometimes with councils, and I'm not being critical here, is this balancing between long and short-term perspectives. Because if you don't pay for it, or they don't pay for it, the current populace doesn't pay for it, somebody else can pay for it. And so it's all about this balancing. And I wish you luck. I'm you have a very, very difficult job, and I'm very, very respectful of that. And we as staff will always work to support you. But you're in a tough time right now. I just wanted to recognize that.
Like we didn't already know.
Well, you know what? Sometimes you don't think that staff care. We actually.
We know you do. It's a challenging place to be in everywhere.
Yeah. That's all.
Good info.
I was interviewed this last week and right after I'd said that the rain event was 344 millimeters. The reporter asked me, well, what are you gonna do to stop that? 344 millimeters of rain. We'll check and see what we can do.
That's a huge part of it where they
It's
don't
huge,
understand and you can explain it. I had the same experience where I explained what had happened and then later I was asked, why didn't the infrastructure that we built work? And I'm like, because a mountain came down into that infrastructure by the rain. And they don't understand.
To your point, Mr. Stewart, on TransLink, one of the challenges we have is that we have a lot of aging infrastructure within the system. And the partners only want to come together for the sexy new item. They don't want to be coming together to fix a 40-year-old escalator at the Granville Street SkyTrain station. And so it's extremely difficult. You're on your own to deal with the nuts and bolts and the basic infrastructure programs. And so while there's all the while this expectation that you're going to modernize and expand it's a tough spot to be in, but I've found over the last 6 years that we have a very well-educated community that's actually extremely gracious on most matters and understanding of the complexity of the challenges that we face. That doesn't always mean that the expectations are always reasonable. More with less is going to be the constant pressure. But at the end of the day, I think the vast majority of people in our community love living here, and there's a big competition for people to try to come and live in this place because of the location. But it's definitely a challenge we'll all have as a parent of 4 kids to try to leave a better world for my kids than I had an opportunity in. But it starts with making sure that we're not making decisions that erode our ability to make decisions in future. And part of that is making sure we're being responsible with our purse along the way. We put a lot of pressure on our team here today to figure out how to do
Fix
more
everything.
in an environment where you've got 40% inflation on elevator costs on construction, and somehow you're going to have to figure out how to keep it all going for 5.5%. So I'm very much looking forward to your budget and your presentation.
I just want to assure council, we can do this.
Yeah.
I don't want you, we can't. It might make a couple of tough decisions, but I hopefully not too many, but we can do it. We've done it for years, and I've now been city manager for years. I've seen all these ups and downs and dips, and they're all doable. They're all doable. It's just a matter of communication with the community, and then working with council in a collaborative way. So, anyway.
Go.
Thanks very much for that context. I'll start with a little bit of housekeeping. The information for this workshop was sent out last week, but there was supplemental information distributed today. I apologize for that, but we have had a lot going on with emergency response and other matters, and I thought it necessary for this information to come forward. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I'll just add a couple things from the start. The first part is an update on our infrastructure.
Can I make one point? We're not asking you to make a decision tonight. Okay, I just want to make that really, really clear.
Yeah.
What we're doing is trying to inform you, so you can start to make it.
So very brief update on the infrastructure, the status of our infrastructure, what we're targeting to set aside and what we're actually setting aside. It looks like a big number, but we can get into that another time. I can safely say that when we speak at the Regional Finance Advisory Committee that we're leading those discussions, and that this council has been very good at supporting renewing our aging infrastructure. We started setting aside money again last year, and this proposal includes an additional 1% for renewing our infrastructure. I also included a slide on what's happening with the liquid waste levy from Metro Vancouver, just so you can put that into context. those charges triple over the next 5 years. And we are taking advantage of the rate stabilization strategy that was set up through the district council a number of years ago. And now that money is available to stabilize the rates. And the first year of the 5-year phase-in is a bit of a hit. And so we're doing that this year. And you can see that on the slide and the supplemental information that relates to average impact or impacts on the average home. And the final couple things, I did have an interactive model, but we're having some technology problems, so we'll just skip that. I'll speak to it. And there's a few notes in the memo speaking to how we might go about addressing the capital funding gap. I know there's a lot of interest in that, and Peter's here today, but generally speaking, we have confirmed that we have a $50 million funding gap, and to the mayor's point about making sure that we have some resiliency in our financial planning. That means not draining all of our reserves, not using all of our debt flexibility, and leaving some flexibility for the matters that are still unresolved.
That's not a $50 million gap every year. That's a $50 million gap over 5 years.
Yeah, it's a $50 million capital funding gap over a 5-year period.
So that's not as significant as you think. Okay, that's just drift because we have an $80 million tail every year. Right. That's just drift. We can deal with that. I'm not saying that it's going to be easy, but we can deal with it.
So with that out of the way and getting to the goal of the workshop. So I'll be providing an update on our financial position as we take an early look at our property taxes and utility rates for the next year. Based on council feedback from the workshop this July, staff are busy working on bringing in next year's budget at a lower property tax increase than the 7% last year. Due to the increased cost of maintaining our aging infrastructure and current service levels, we've prepared 4 scenarios, with the recommended scenario being scenario 2, which is based on the 5.5% property tax increase and some reduction in services. I'll walk through the details of that a little bit later. But although we're not seeking decisions, we are seeking some support for us to continue the work on budget scenario 2, which is that 5.5% scenario. I see that as the middle ground based on the feedback from last July, based on the budget engagement and feedback from the public, and all the recent events that have happened. It's a scenario that I think we can see through. I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback later on after the presentation. Next slide. Before we take a look at scenario 2, I'll provide a brief update on the timeline and the position and the recent public on the budget. Next slide. There are 5 key milestones following the budget outlook. We'll be introducing budget in the new year for when council votes on the final budget. The purpose of tonight is to get that direction on that scenario that we put forward. We're still aiming for the end of the year for capital plan approval, even though we've had some slippage in the schedule. I think that's to engineering's benefit to do that. And with the updates on the transportation plan in November and some other additional information, I think we can get there before the end of the year. Next slide. Already spent a lot of time on the environmental scan.
For the benefit of Councillor, could you speak up?
Oh, sorry. I should know better. Yeah, just briefly on a few things that we didn't touch on. Obviously, the Bank of Canada recently came out with a reduction in the policy interest rate. It's been reduced to 3.75%. So that's reflecting lower levels of inflation, and that has already led to lower borrowing costs. And as David mentioned, we are heavily based in construction indexes when it comes to the structure of our finances, and it's good to see construction and general inflation starting to move down. Although there's still some after effects that we haven't caught up on. Our construction permits have slowed this year, so we're seeing the effects of that and reduced revenue. But we're optimistic that trend will reverse next year as the market improves and the cost of borrowing continues to decline. We spoke a little bit about labor markets in Canada and how we're feeling the effects of that. The Canadian markets are improving and at the local level, we're continuing to experience some shortages, especially with police and recreation. So while there are some promising trends, a number of external factors continue to impact municipalities across the region, where we're experiencing cost increases above general inflation. Next slide. Just briefly on our current financial position. I've been here a while and our operating budget has never been tighter than it is this year. We're projecting a much lower operating surplus forecast for the end of the year. So that'll remove some of that flexibility that we normally have to top up some of our reserves, especially related to risk through the year-end process. While our capital spending is in line with prior years and infrastructure costs increases are slowing, the capital funding gap I mentioned at the outset has grown. And we're all aware of what's happening with Metro Vancouver. If you pull up their financial plan and look at the change between 2024 and 2029 for the North Shore households, the total change over that 5-year period is $979 per household. So, and again, we're stabilizing the first year impacts and future year impacts a little bit through the use of reserves that we've set aside in prior years. Next slide. This slide is just a brief summary of the drivers for the budget and the financial plan. The items shown in blue are what's different since July. And generally what we're looking at here is increases in protective services. Over time, a lot of that's coming through the police agreement and where we currently are with our complement level. So there's some issues there that the police committee and the officer in charge are working through. And then the transition to econ from police, from the Jerry Brewer building to the ecom service, just been updated on those costs and those are significant. So all of these drivers accumulate into this estimated 8% property tax increase to maintain our services and an estimated 10% utility rate increase this year. And in the supplemental information distributed, it's in the range of $356 on the average home in 2025, which is in line with what it was last year, lower on the taxes, but higher on the utilities. We also have some new requests that we're working through as a team, and generally they're supporting the implementation efforts around the new housing legislation. There's additional costs for infrastructure and managing risk, as well as other priorities. And so when we bring this budget back, we'll make sure we have a good summary of what that looks like for council's consideration. Next slide. My favorite part. At council's direction, a public engagement on the 2025 budget was held between September 6th and 30th. Purpose was to hear directly from the interested community members regarding the budget, including their tax tolerance. The engagement resulted in 1,437 responses from community members, and interim results are included as attachment 1 to the report. My own reflection on this, while not perfect, this is the first time we've reached out to the community in this way during the budget process. I found the information very useful. I see this as a great step forward in improving our public engagement on the budget in the future. Maybe not every year, but it's a way to check in on our progress and make sure that we're on the right track and inform council what the community's preferences. Next slide. This financial planning framework was introduced during last year's budget process. We already have 5 guiding financial principles, and really they're wrapped up into number 1 at the top, which is how do we, in all of everything that's going on around us, how do we go about maintaining services as the community grows? And so that's always our starting point. The next 4 are meant to serve as serve council in a way where you can look at the budget from different lenses, and we can help you create options and help you in your decision making around the annual budget process. So I'll just briefly go through number 2 is a very significant one. There are no impacts included in the budget, but it's a very substantial one in my opinion, and that's where we continue our efforts, not only in the region, but in the province to advocate for change for the benefit of the community and to provide some useful information for council for decision-making, but also helping us to advocate for change. A couple of examples of that, the tax legislation, a problem for a number of years, and we continue to advocate for changing that Port Property Tax Act. There's other tax implications that we like to see resolved. And of course, the recent decision on the wastewater treatment plant. So there are a number of things that we want to keep coming back to make sure we don't forget, because they could be very impactful on the budget. 3 is really the majority of what we're looking at in scenario 2. This is where, as a staff team, we're really taking a look under all the corners and everywhere to make sure that we've identified all the opportunities and all the risks, and we're bringing forward the full picture to the best of our ability. And so budget scenario 2, which is the recommendation, is a reflection of that. It's kind of the middle of the road where we're pulling back a little bit and looking for other ways to fund, but doing our best to live within our means. 4 really has been a conversation that we've had for a while. Council wants us to improve understanding on the budget. I think we're getting there, and with the engagement process, we've made some strides there. And then following the workshop, we were reminded that council wanted to see a connection between resources and performance. And so we've included that as a trailing section to the tonight's presentation. Next slide. We can just a brief moment on this one. These were the 4 scenarios that we put together. And all this is doing is illustrating the framework, and that we're starting somewhere in the middle with that scenario 2. Next slide. So under budget scenario 2, what we're seeing here is that staff are proposing changes to both the operating and capital budgets to bring them into balance, along with setting aside funds for identifying risks. I wanted to get this in the on-screen center, but I'll just briefly speak to it now. Okay, so there's 3 columns there. The operating budget shows a $3 million ongoing funding gap. So the first few numbers there are illustrating how staff are proposing going about resolving that gap. And then the capital funding gap of 50 million, as we talked about earlier, that's the gap over the next 5 years. It's about 6% of the total 5-year capital plan. So it's not a major amount, but it is a gap that we need to resolve. And then as we've identified all of the risks that the organization is facing, we've estimated expected outcomes for those risks to be in the range of $20 million. So that forms the last part of the gaps that we're trying to resolve through this budget process. Next slide, please. These next number of slides just describe what the budget scenario looks like. So under the operating budget, we're looking at achieving $3 million in savings. It will require some efficiencies to be realized and will likely lead to additional positions being left vacant. We may see some services stop or be delivered differently, but the impacts to the community are expected to be relatively minor. And then in order to balance the operating budget, we are looking at some user fees increasing above inflation. And we're looking at allocating the new revenue from paid parking and parks, where there were additional locations that council approved. Council expected us to use that money for funding improvements in parks. And so what we're suggesting here is that funding be leveraged to borrow in order to advance some of the park improvements that council would like to see. Next slide. And in order to balance the capital plan, scenario 2 includes a reduction in capital spending as well as the additional work that I just mentioned. And the additional borrowing will bring the total new debt issued from 2024 through the end of this plan to just approximately 88 million, which is still within the consent zone. So no permission of the community is required for that. That's the under the community charter, the consent free zone is 5% ongoing revenue, and with that debt issued, we'd still be within that limit. Next slide. Next slide. Oh, did you go to there? Did I have 2 slides there? On the risk management, staff continue to assess risks related to the changing climate, our infrastructure, and many other factors, including the new housing and development finance legislation. As I mentioned, we, on an ongoing basis, we review our reserves over the year end and ensure appropriate funds are set aside for these identified risks and expected outcomes. And with the operating surplus shrinking this year, we'll be looking at other funds to reallocate to make sure that we have funds to address those risks. Next slide. I won't spend any time on this. Suffice to say, you've seen these before. I'm just bringing them back for your attention. What's new and different here is we're modernizing the zoning bylaw and OCP update next year. Next slide. We're suggesting a debt servicing limit capped at 10% of ongoing revenue. It's below 5 right now, but it's good just to have a measure out there. We have other considerations with our flexibility as well. So when we look at through the longer term, knowing what that debt limit might be is helpful for planning. And on leading in climate emergency action and environmental management, we're looking at enhancing reporting on organization and community performance. Next slide. On this goal around fostering community well-being, culture, and safety, there's a major project completing this year. So during this term, we've seen childcare continue to increase, new parks. I want to point out with the artificial turf fields, at the start of this council's term, we had 3 artificial turf fields, and by 2026, we'll have 6 artificial turf fields. And that compares well on the North Shore and ahead of the city of North Vancouver on a per capita basis. And of course, when it comes to informing future investments in recreation and sport, we're looking to that amenity planning process that's underway. And we have the forest resiliency strategy and natural areas trail strategy to consider over the plan as well. Next slide. And internally, just looking at the organization, there's a number of improvements, a lot of technology improvements. We talked a lot about that. And of course, we're looking to improve our processes and satisfaction with the services, as well as maintain our standing as one of the BC's top employers. And looking to the future with facilities, including this one, there's with the rate of growth that's likely to occur over the next few years, we're going to have to start thinking beyond the space that we currently have and into the spaces we need in the future. Next slide. That brings me to the end. Sorry, I went a little bit long. I did want to bring up the interactive model, so maybe we'll just go there so we can see that slide. It's at the very, very end. Make that a little bit bigger. So this is just a simplified view, and what it's trying to do is just lay out what potential changes council could suggest, if any. And when you look under 1A there, right now we're at a 5.5% property tax increase proposed. It could be less, it could be more. And then
You're talking about option 2.
Area 2.
Yeah, on the back page.
Page 19 in that package,
Right.
page 27 on the additional supplemental slide package.
Got it.
Did it twice.
sorry, I meant to have in the model, but I don't have it, the technology's not working, so.
Oh, so it'll actually adjust the number?
Yeah, it was all set up to adjust if you had any
It
thoughts,
didn't
but
work. Now it doesn't work.
it works, but the technology doesn't.
I think it's premature to
Yes.
start meddling at this point. I think what we need to do is to give council an opportunity to ask some questions
Yeah.
about what's in,
Yeah.
not in.
Yeah,
Sure.
You know, if we assume based on the finance and advisory committee recommendations, that we're about at 5.5. Now it's important to say for council, we won't know this yet. Because I'm gonna have to sit and meet with all the senior managers and say, how do we make these cuts? Because these aren't insignificant cuts.
Yeah.
But how do we make it without having real impact on services? And how do we communicate that to the community and communicate it back to council? So really, this is just an opportunity for council to say, okay, if we're roughly in the 5.5 area, okay, what's in and what's not out there, I might be really concerned about. I think that's what's of interest to you folks at the end of the day.
Are we done with all the slides? Is that it?
We're done.
Okay. No more technology. Good.
Well, so just my comments on it. Thank you, Rick, for putting that together, and Jazz. One of my core issues that I've been arguing for in all of the budgets that involved in the district is that we don't engage in deferred maintenance. That when we're looking at our facilities, we are doing our best to get the entire life out of those facilities by properly maintaining them, making them as available to the public as possible, so we're not underutilizing the facilities. But I've seen a number of times in the past, and I'm not saying that it's happened here, where the district under tight pressure has tried to put some elements of deferred maintenance. Delbrook comes to mind, a few other times where rec centers and others were put on the blocks for that. I don't support us engaging in deferred maintenance. One other comment I was going to make is as a TransLink rep, I know what's coming down the road in terms of us having to commit resources to get the bus rapid transit up and running in our community. We are going to have to commit a lot of resources to make that happen. And it's the only way we can really contribute to the solution of the biggest problem that I think we hear in our community, the most frequently expressed problem in our community, that largely, as you said in your preamble, Dave, is only going to be entirely solved by provincial and federal intervention. But one way we can support is by having fast and reliable transit system that people see as a viable alternative to driving in their car. And we're going to have to make those investments. And so, again, the budget going forward, I think, is going to have to prepare for that eventuality, both in terms of making land available, plan beats no plan, getting ahead of the transit plan into the area and making sure that we're setting aside land before the major uplifts occur on those lands and start acquiring those places. And also aligning our internal plans so that they all understand what's going on with that transit file, because it's going to affect a lot of aspects of our business when you have that come in. I support 5.5, and I tried to, in the last two budgets, really try to caution people around adding additional new expenses to the budget, because from talking to Gavin, our former chief engineer,
GM of engineering.
I don't know, the GM of engineering, I don't know, check the date. He was extremely concerned, expressed a lot of caution around escalating costs in our contract and how they were going to eat up any goodwill we may have in the budget, because even just doing the simple stuff we've committed to is under a lot of pressure economically to be able to be delivered anywhere close to the cost. And so very much cautioned on committing to new projects when we don't have enough money set aside for the existing projects. And then I also remember the comments of Andy Wardell on his way out the door saying that as our council is trying to fill in the gap left by the provincial government in terms of social safety net supports, producing affordable housing, deep dive social and affordable housing, and all of those other things, that the planned income that we were going to get from development in this community is going to be seriously reduced, because every time you commit to a purpose-built rental, as an example, you change the valuation of the building and you don't get to extract the CAC to go around and actually use to maintain and upgrade your infrastructure. And so with all of those things in mind, I'm very cautious about adding new expenditures going forward. And so I'll be supportive of a 5.5. I am still supportive of the, I know there's a lot of people here with some interest in the Handsworth Field. I am still interested in us completing that project with the school district. But largely, I think we have to be very cautious about adding any new additional expenditures. And really, we're going to have to knuckle down on figuring out how we're actually going to pay for the stuff we've already committed to. So that's just my general comments on the matter. I don't know if you have a response, Rick.
Let's not use the word resources. Resources are money. Because sometimes you say, oh, we need more resources, but resources somebody's got to pay for it somewhere down the line. And the second one is, as I understand it, Rick, can I correct me if I'm wrong? Handsworth is in the budget.
Yes.
We're going to build it. So we don't need a lot of fuss and for all about that. It's in the budget. We're going to do it. We're going to do Inter River. We're not going to do the gravel fields because we can't do them all. Okay, but we'll do Inter River and we'll do Handsworth. So we don't need have a debate unless council doesn't want to do them. We don't need a debate on that.
Fair enough. Yeah, and so you have a response to my comments.
I just wanted to address a couple of comments that you made on the funding set aside for TransLink. We did work very closely with Peter Cohen, GM Engineering Services, and Jim Ryder, our manager of properties, and making sure that at this stage, the identified areas where we would need to make investments were included in the proposed development cost charges. Of course, it's very early days, but I would say we've made some appropriate placeholders to give some flexibility for those future investments. In the concerns around development finance and where that's going, I have those concerns as well. In proposed development charges, both DCCs and ACCs, we still have a longer term issue with how we fund affordable housing. And so our first step is to set aside a portion of the CACs, which we were recommending through the upcoming financial plan amendment, to make sure that we can see through the commitments that we have on affordable housing. But those funds will likely last only 5 years, and we're going to have to keep working on a longer term solution. It's not a sustainable plan.
Councilor Miriam?
So on that, we have to recognize that, as Mr. Stewart's pointed out, we can't do everything and we can't pick up all of the downloading from senior levels of government. I had this conversation when I was first elected 28 years ago, when you were in finance and I was new to council, and we began downloading started from the federal government. Certainly the housing portfolio that was looked after by the feds in the 70s began to dry up, that disappeared. And now we're having to look after these responsibilities. And we've seen, certainly through my role at Metro Vancouver with infrastructure projects, that those infrastructure projects are now billions and billions of dollars. And two of the biggest ones are just not even about growth. They're just responding to requirements by the federal government to clean up the receiving waters from liquid waste projects. So North Shore Wastewater Treatment Plant and Iona is an order by the federal government to have secondary treatment on those plants. Can you talk just about the smoothing of the rates for the utility, our reserves in regards to the Metro Vancouver costs, Rick?
Yes, so a number of years ago, mid 2015, in that range, we started setting aside funding in anticipation of the wastewater treatment plant when it was a 700 million or lower project. And that those contributions continued for a number of years at a very modest amount. They were increased last year when we realized what the numbers were going to be. And so we've now accumulated, I think, in the range of 15 to 20 million, depending on what the infrastructure needs are going to be for that particular utility. And will enable that money to flow back and smooth rates over the next few years. So the rate increase for this year would be likely double that 10% without the rate smoothing that we're putting in place this
And
year.
that number is,
I think the utility rate increase in the average home is about 200, so it'd be closer to 400 or maybe a little bit more.
right. So I think that's important to recognize, and I think the mayor said this many times, that we're not finished, you know, working to get this number lower, Metro Vancouver. I think it's important for council and the community to understand that we had originally asked for a $40 assist by the rest of the municipalities in the region. We're split into 4 sewage districts, and ultimately that request was defeated by the board. We lost by about 26 votes. And we had 3 more options. So we went through 3 more times on votes, and we lost 2 more votes, and we're successful in getting a $10 assist. It's not what we wanted. And part of the challenge is Metro Vancouver works with a weighted vote system. So each municipality has a number of votes based on their population. I sit on the board for the District of North Vancouver, and I carry 5 votes, but the City of Vancouver and the City of Surrey, they have 5 councillors, and they each carry 5 votes, 4 or 5. City has there's some anomalies in it. And the premise of Metro Vancouver is we are representing the region, and we are making decisions based on the best decisions for the region as a whole. In practice, it doesn't always work that way. It is hard to separate the role that you play in your municipality from the regional role. And it's part of the challenge, I think, in where we've ended up. So we continue to work with our colleagues at Metro Vancouver. We continue to work with staff to get the information that we need to best deal with this problem. You know, the bottom line is we had a contractor that did not fulfill the contract. And now we are having to kind of start over again, and this is why the costs increased. There was some questions from residents in the municipality that asked why a sewage treatment plant in Victoria that was about the same size, about the same age, why did it go ahead and it was on budget, and why was the Metro Vancouver project not on budget? And the simple answer to that question is the contractor that was hired did what they said they were going to do. They came in on budget, they committed to the project, and they completed it as they were asked. The contractor that we had did not. And this is why we have wound up the situation that we're in. So we continue to work. I will tell you that the representatives on the North Shore, we are united. Mayor Buchanan and myself are bringing forward a motion this Friday to the board meeting in regards to asking that the budget be reduced to between 5% and 7%. We're hoping there's some interest in looking at 7. It's set at 9 right now, but we're asking that we're going to keep hammering that as we go forward in subsequent budgets as well. We voted against the budget in the last round because we did not think that the allocation for the North Shore was fair. And so we continue to push and I think represent well the citizens of North Vancouver. But it's a vote, and it's like around this table. There can be a split, and the majority wins the day, and that is the same at the board of Metro Vancouver. So I'll stop there. I have some other comments, let others talk, but I just wanted to comment on, we're talking about regional TransLink. There's the Metro Vancouver perspective.
A lot of things coming all at once. Councillor Hanson.
Thank you very much. Thank you for comments of the mayor. Thank you for your comments, Councillor Murray. This is the 11th time that I've been involved in this exact process.
Congrats.
And apropos comments that came earlier this meeting, it is the most difficult. For most of those 11 years, we just rolled over at 2% for inflation, 1% added for infrastructure. There was a community consensus around that. And even as recently as the election 2 years ago, this wasn't really an election issue. We were still talking about 2% for inflation and 1% for infrastructure, and that's changed. We're now, in recent history, having faced much larger increases, and we're now in the situation where even if we have a 5.5% increase, 4.5% for operating and 1% for infrastructure, that leaves us with a deficit. That leaves us with having to make cuts and reduce our operations in some way or another. Addressing the principal question, I do support the 5.5% as a reasonable balancing point. Going forward, I believe we must make a high priority as Mayor Hill said about continuing what we promised. That's where we have to start, doing what we said we would do. That's going to mean that we must be very careful about other promises going forward. I personally will be a voice for avoiding debt as much as possible. We're not, Mayor Little talked about his 4 children. I have 2. We're not doing them any favors or future residents any favors. We just download today's problem by shifting over debt with all the interest charges that are involved to these future residents. I note as well that this is all occurring in a context of shared pain all around the senior levels of government. You're all in fiscal crisis, frankly, if you're to be accurate about the description. And our residents are, many of them, facing the most challenging financial times they have had in a long time. And because of that, they really are looking to us to be responsible with their money right now. So from my point of view, assuming we achieve the consensus at the 5.5%, as they say, 4.5%, and then 1% for infrastructure. And I'm glad to be continuing with the 1% for infrastructure because that's an investment in our future that I think is very important. We are soon going to have to shift the discussion to a much more specific analysis of what and where we got, what services that we don't expand for sure, but where we actually find some savings. As I see it here, it's $1.8 million in savings. That's a significant amount of savings for our organization. And I appreciate that built into this are some buffers for that. So I look forward to the discussion. I'll leave it there. I realize it's somewhat general at this point, but I think that's probably where it needs to be. I look forward to listening to the community further, listening to everyone at this table, and finding the best possible balance between taxes and the tax increase we're proposing, reduction to reserves, or a continuation with our capital plan and curtailment of what we can in order to make the budget more reasonable balance. Thank you.
Councillor Mah.
Thank you. A lot of good work here. Thanks to your team, Greg, Jazz, and Asha. I'm assuming probably did a lot of the heavy lifting. I do appreciate having a longer runway. You have to look at the potential plan previous years. Not as much time, and we need to really try to keep property tax to an acceptable level. I think this report is in approach is very balanced, a lower increase compared to last year, some service reduction augmented also by new revenue. Given our current uncertain and dynamic financial environment, I think 5.5 is a prudent move. I do have some unease. I get it, we're trying to find savings, but one of the ways to reduce our operating budget is to not fill vacant positions. I think that comes as a double-edged sword. My concern is that it could delay moving ahead with projects that we've approved in previous years. And my concern, no one has a crystal ball, but my concern is that we're gonna be paying more for something a couple years down the road, instead of kind of like biting the bullet, do it now. Just a question, in terms of some of our projects not moving forward, is it financial resources or is it staff resources, or is it a combination of both?
Yeah, so through the mayor, I think the primary focus in terms of shifting capital projects around is to make the budget work. We've messaged to council for quite some time that we are resource constrained. I think the events of the last week or so is going to make us more constrained in the months ahead. So it's a bit of a combination of both, but for the purpose of this exercise, some of the shifting around has really been focusing on making budget work. But as the CEO said before, we have a capital tail every year. It's natural in municipal government, and that's where we're saying that from the capital side of the fence, the $50 million number that you see, it's in line with that capital tail. It's just part of this. We do, the projects do go over a particular year. So in terms of that being a specific concern, we think it's just part of just regular business on that front.
So I take no comments from Mr. Stewart.
Yeah, I still want to paraphrase a previous councillor about the must should to do.
Yeah, those were good phrases.
That's where we're kind of at, and it's just going to take a little courage to say and prioritize the stuff we have to do, we would like to do, and then those things that are discretionary. I also appreciate that some of those decisions are political. And I just hate to say this, I'm gonna give you permission to be political about things, just so we know. So we can figure this out. And I'll just go back to, you have a really competent staff in the district of North Vancouver. We can work this all out. We just need to know what's important so that we can make sure that we do it.
Thank you, David. I was picking up on your point earlier, the level of trust of politicians is maybe not at a great level. I think back to my first year on council and hearing that, there's been promises made, 5 or 8 years ago, and they're still outstanding. That leads to people not trusting us. So I get it. I don't have an answer, but I just put it out there. We need to kind of really find that balance. And I know Councillor Hanson said that, and we use this word a lot. We need to find that balance where we move ahead with our priorities that we've committed to, while also being responsible and potentially not taking on new responsibilities and pushing back hard when there's downloading. People in our community have said what's important to them. And I think it's holding on us to try to meet those requirements. If there's some things that need to be deferred, let's make sure we look at it really hard that, in 2 years' time, the budget's not going to be double. Like, I was shocked that, River budget's now $10 million or something like that. It's like, it's just a tough to keep pushing it off. We commit to something, we really need to put our best efforts to getting it done. And if it's a staffing issue, we know that there's a lot of people retiring right now. I don't know, potentially for a short term, we bring them back on contract to help with that gap, not commit to a new full-time position permanent, but potentially look at someone to come in to kind of project manage those key projects. So
we manage that all the time, and I can't begin to tell you how many permutations we've had over the years, temporary, full-time, casual. We've managed a whole different thing. I think the biggest challenge for this council, in my opinion, is not promising to deliver something that depends on senior levels of government. That's the real challenge you have right now, because we can't control them. And so people are expecting, bridge improvements or road improvements or transit improvements or parks improvements. I mean, I can go on and on and on. But the point is, if we don't have control over that stuff, we just have to be very careful about promising it and tend to our knitting, which is the stuff we can do. Because I know we can do what we need to do.
Right, totally respect that, and you know, the examples you gave are things that we need senior level government to provide funding. There's other things that, you know, are probably more within our control, so.
Our living.
Thank you, Councillor Beck.
Thank you, Mayor Little, and thank you very much, Rick and Jazz, for all your work in putting this budget together and presentation today. Agree with all the comments that have been made so far. These budgets are getting more and more difficult. And going into this session, you know, when we had the first look at 2025 budget in the summer, I said that I wanted to see a lower property tax increase from what we've seen in the last couple of years. And I think 5.5% is a number that I am, like my colleagues, comfortable with. I think it does strike a balance. My colleagues have said before me, I think we need to continue to deliver on the things that we have promised as a council. And I know there's people in the room who are here, you know, for various promises that we've made, and I want to continue to see those projects move forward. I thought the survey was very interesting. There was a few things that kind of surprised me, but you know, for the most part, I was glad to kind of hear where the community's priorities are. You know, replacement of aging infrastructure and upgrades to our culverts and drainage systems, obviously at the top of the list, and that is just so top of mind with me, given you know, the events of a week ago. So I hope that you know we can continue to make those important projects happen to make sure that we are prepared for climate change, which is very much upon us, having seen the scale and devastation of that atmospheric river. Interesting to see, you know, the level of support for other potential sources of revenue, things like a sponsorship policy. There's pretty strong support to look at, you know, potentially involving sponsors of some of our community assets to help pay for some of the new projects that we want to see move forward. So I'm interested in looking at that. You know, different ways that we can use public facilities, increasing user fees for rental of some of these spaces. I think that's something that we can be looking at as well. But I do agree with Councillor Ma's comments. I mean, things that are deferred just don't go down in price. They continue to go up, and the cost of some of these capital projects is just astounding, really, to see, you know, you get just a few short years, how much they've increased. So I want to be very careful with this projects that we, you know, look to defer as well. But, you know, I want to deliver on the projects that we promised, you know, in some of the key areas, obviously being our commitments around affordable housing, around active transportation, where I feel like we're really making some progress now to connect some of these various active transportation routes throughout the community. And yeah, really focusing on the things that we can control, and we're not having to advocate to other levels of government. I hear that comment as well. And so it's just sort of my initial comments.
Councillor Murray, a second time.
Rick, we talked about leveraging pay parking to borrow.
Yeah.
I think what I'm seeing in the survey is we got to live within our means. And I'm not sure that, I think we have to start doing that more. Like, I'm already thinking about next year's budget. Like, what's it going to be? What's the tax increase next year? And we got to bring it down below what we're talking about right now. Maybe I can muster the strength to maybe put my hand up a little bit for 5.5. I liked it when we were at 3.5. That number since COVID just shot up. And I really do think we need to live within our means, because we've got things coming that we're going to have to deal with. You know, when we talk about the downloading from senior levels of government, the feds and the province have not been there. Metro Vancouver's been lobbying them for years for infrastructure funding, and it's not there. In fact, even monies that have been committed by the federal government, we do not have. The money has not been transferred. And it's a very sobering place when the doors of population increase is controlled by the federal government, And then we are having to build the infrastructure to support that increase in population. And there is no connection between the two. That is very, very frustrating. We're 3 million people in this region. 3 million people in this region. That's not even the taxpayers represent half of that, or 55%. And we're supposed to be funding $10 billion projects. That's Iona. TransLink project from Surrey to Langley, they believe will come in at $10 billion. It's 4 billion. It started at 2 billion. In 6 months, it went up to 4 billion. Like, it's just, it is one, massive project after another piling on itself. And it's not sustainable. It's absolutely not sustainable. So I don't want to borrow any more money right now. We've borrowed a lot of money. And as Councillor Hanson said, 4, 3, 2, 2, we've all got children, and this is all going to be on their, it's going to be their responsibility to pay it off. So I just think we need to slow down. We've got a hole in the roof right now. It's not a good time to buy new furniture for the living room. Let's fix the hole in the roof. The funding from senior levels of government is not there, and we've got another election coming. We've had one that's just recently completed, and we've made our concerns known, and we hope that they're going to let us sit at the table so we can discuss things instead of the past. Risk and liability. You and I've talked about that a lot. Risk and liability is crippling us. The issue of liability on government is just killing us in some respects. And it was certainly much easier in the past, 20, 30 years ago. But now it is do nothing, don't take responsibility, make sure we protect ourselves at all costs, even if we know that it's in the best interest of the community to take that risk, because we need to look after them. And risk taking is learned. It's a lived life, and you have to be able to be very confident in order to take that risk. And we have a different complement right now. We've got a lot of the corporate memory is walking out the door retiring, and so we really have to think about what is the right thing to do. I'm going to say this, but during COVID, we had the parades for the grads that we had in our community to celebrate graduation in 2020. And he's gone now, so I can say this, but our fire chief at the time was told maybe by a department, because the community had asked if the fire department could lead the parades. And he was told, not leading the parade, there's too much liability. And the fire chief at the time said, I'm leading the parade because it's the right thing to do. And he was right. And it brought so many people out into the community. So sometimes we have to take risks because it's the right thing to do. But we have to understand that more. I want to understand.
We take a lot more risk.
I know you do. I know.
I knew you didn't know about.
Okay, you've talked enough. It's my turn. Okay. Quickly, just the work project and resources. And I'm not going to talk about the resource because I agree with David that resources are, they're costs, right? And I've said this over the years, but it's very easy when we sit at this table to say, oh, Rick, I want you to go and do this. And Mr. Cohen, I want you to go do this and this and this and this and this and this. And then Mr. Milburn, please go and look after these projects. We're going to take a motion and we're going to pass another project. And then everybody downstairs is like juggling all these multiple projects, plans, scenarios. And there has to be a better connection to this table's understanding as to what's going on in the departments when we are requesting yet another motion, another issue being dealt with. We can't just keep adding to your list of things to do because it's pretty big, isn't it? It's big. And we've got a lot of challenges. We have to recognize our challenges because we're ever changing. New revenues, yes, thinking outside the box. And I've got some ideas from things that we've talked about over the years that I think we've put off because maybe they were too complicated, but I think there's ways around them. And I think we have to look at them quite seriously to create new revenue. And it's not about fees. It's not increasing fees. It's not adding more payment structures for people. It's about using our existing assets to help us in this very challenging time. Technology platforms, I was talking to Mr. Daniluk today, and where we were once, and he was responsible for this, we were once the leaders in technology in this region. We were one of the first to renovate our halls. We put in state-of-the-art computer equipment and technology equipment, and we were once the leaders. You know, now we've maybe slipped behind that title and that place in the queue. But I think we need to give serious thought. We talk as counselors, we talk about our website. And I still don't think any of us love it. I don't. I find it cumbersome. It's clunky. It's not easy to find anything. I much prefer the City of North Vancouver's website. But we've invested in some change, but it's still a clunky system for me. And I think there's some clunky systems that exist within our departments. And I think we need to spend some money so we help offset the need for resources by the technology that we put in place to be able to track things. And then my last comment would be the survey. I think it's sane. I think that survey, and we're doing a lot of surveys right now. There's a lot of surveys, and I've done them. I find them challenging to do because I feel like if you answer one way, it's leading you to another place that I don't want to go. I just want a big square box where I can make comments. So the surveys, we have to take them with a grain of salt, and they're a moment in time. But I think this survey is saying that we need to live within our means. And I think the community is saying that we have to tighten our belts because there's another storm coming. We can't predict it. We don't know when it's going to happen, and we don't know how devastating it's going to be. And we have to be prepared for it.
Thank you very much. I too found the survey fascinating, and I was so pleased that you did take it on and we're getting some input from the community in that regard, in addition to what we get from emails and the people who come out to the meetings to express their wants and needs. And I was pleased to see that the community in that survey ranks parks and rec services and trails and sports amenities very high on the list. And of course, this aligns with what we've heard over and over again over numerous budget rounds that I've been part of the last few years. And, you know, people pay a lot of money to live in the District of North Van, and they expect to have the kinds of amenities and facilities that other communities have, including ATFs, including active transportation. Apparently yesterday, pickleball players at Little Kate's Park were told they couldn't have a porta potty this year because there was no money for that. Like, that is just outrageous. They play there all winter long and they're gonna have nowhere to go to the bathroom, like, in this wealthy community. So if the goal is to reduce taxes to 5.5%, and I support that. No one wants to pay 7% again, so I support 5.5%. But how do we do that without cutting service and delaying projects and some of these other things that are being suggested here, and going back on our promises to the community and things that we're going to provide? I have a different approach. I suggest that we sharpen our pencils with municipal expenses and the cost of this government. You know, not replacing vacant positions has been suggested, fine. But there's also been a huge increase in exempt staff in the last few years, and that means managers and senior executives. Since 2020, 27 new exempt positions have been added, seniors and managers, from 158 in 2020 to 185 this year. Do we really need more managers and directors? And just to give you an idea of how much this costs us, and to give the public some idea of, you know, senior executive salaries and such, an example is the chief administrative officer's position at the DNB. Last year, the CAO took home $314,000 in base salary, plus $144,000 in other, whatever that is, for a total of $459,000 last year, one position.
Just to be clear though, Counselor, not to be argumentative on that, that's already been explained a number of times that that other was money owed by the municipality several years in the past and it was carried forward. So while it did get paid out in the year, it's from budgets from years
Previous
ago.
years.
Yeah, that was never thoroughly explained as to why it was in those budgets. And I have never to this day seen any detailing of the $144,000, but let me move on. Other ways I think that we could be looking at are the fleet of cars that's sitting out there, the lovely electric cars that we now have. Most people are working remotely on staff here. But every day that I drive by, I see that parking lot filled with DNV fleet of vehicles. And 2 years ago, I asked for a utilization report, never got it. And I still see them, most of them sitting there every single day. Sure, some of them are used, but do we really need that many electric vehicles? And do we really need to turn them over every few years? Why can't we look at cutting that back? And the one other thing I often hear in the community is, well, do we really need to be, you know, paying for more active transportation? Although it did come out as sort of in the middle of everything in the survey. And I was just wondering, Mr. Cohen, actually, I don't need to put you on the spot, but can you just clarify the Spirit Trail, for example, is largely funded by the provincial government's grants program, as I understand it. Roughly 10 million from the province, 2 million was allocated, has been allocated to the FIBS bathrooms, which we have yet to see happen. Is that correct?
Yeah, so through the mayor, in terms of the Spirit Trail specifically, the principle for that project is that half of it would be coming from other levels of government. We have secured portions of that half. We're still working through the project to get to the remainder of that 50% of external funding.
And the Mount Seymour Parkway project, that's also been funded from outside governments?
Yeah, so through the mayor, in terms of the recent Mount Seymour Parkway project, it was slightly over $1 million, and around 90% of that was funded through TransLink.
Thank you very much. Those are my comments for now.
Mr. Stewart, you had additional comment?
Yeah, just to clarify, the number of exempt staff does not relate to management staff. We have a lot of administrative staff, and I'll just give you 2 examples of the folks that are supporting council. They're exempt. That doesn't mean they're management and they make lots and gobs of money. And then the second issue I take real issue with it. A lot of the cars that are in the parking lot are with inspection folks that handle a lot of work at the front of the day, and then they go over and do inspections. You know, so it's not fair to say that we got a bunch of cars that are doing it going anywhere. That's just not the case, and I'm not even going to dignify the comments about my salary.
Well, I think it's fair to say though, I think a utilization report of vehicles we have is not an unreasonable thing for us to be.
No, I'd be more than pleased to do that. But this sort of off the cuff observation that if you drive by at 9 o'clock and there's a bunch of vehicles it's people not using vehicles. That's just not.
Begs the question, we'll get, it'd be good to get a.
Love to do that.
Councilor Forbes, I think I saw your hand. Actually, I'm going to step out of the room for a minute. You are the acting mayor, so you take over for a minute.
No, it means you can talk for as long as you want. You're in charge.
Reply, you're good.
Yeah.
It's just a workshop, there's no time
You
limit.
want the hammer? Where's the gavel? That's fun.
I have got a bit of notes in here in detail, but this is supposed to be more overall. Just two things up front though that I have been asking for, and I hope is coming. I want the detailed capital projects. council have asked that we get, when we get to capital projects, that we understand what we need to continue on with, what we can defer and.
We'll do that. But right now, if I'm cutting 50 million, I have to work through that. I have to give you a list and saying, this is what's left off the list. And this is what's on the list.
Yeah, or I just want that list, that's all. And the asset liability or asset life schedule that we used to get, I haven't seen one of those in a while, so I'd really like to see that schedule. We get a better understanding of where our assets are sitting, or if we're gonna get a really big bump where a lot of our assets have to be replaced.
We've been having good discussions with the engineering team about creating a state of our assets reports. That's something we could bring back to finance and audit. That's the first step.
That would be great, but we had that kind of report before. Why did it go by the wayside?
We continue to publish the plans on an annual basis and do all the measuring. If we've stopped some reporting, then we can take another look at that.
The big stuff is utilities, which is metro, as you know. And the other big stuff is rec. We've got old recreation facilities.
Facilities, yeah.
And though you look at 250 million plus. The city would probably, we're gonna have to make some hard decisions about how much money, how many hundreds of millions we're gonna spend on recreation facilities, where they need to go.
Yeah.
Because the municipality itself is changing in terms of its needs.
I'm looking forward to totally better to know and not know.
Yeah, absolutely.
I found some interesting things in this survey as well. The greatest portion of our 76% of our population, which I found this to be really, I was shocked actually. 76% of our population is between the age of 35 and 64. I found that I just 76%. So anyway, I was shocked by that. And along with that, though, the community has told us exactly what you're suggesting. They've told us that they don't want us to add more, spend more. They want to keep what we got and continue with what we planned for. On page, or on one of these where it says, due to increased cost of maintaining both our aging infrastructure and current service levels, tell us which of the following options you support. The highest percentage, 57.99, is maintain and reduce. So over half of them, half the population just wants us just to keep it steady if we can keep it steady, which makes sense to me.
I would just make one comment. I mean, we have to interpret these results.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're not, to be very honest, I think it was 10 years ago, we actually mailed out something when we did the survey. We mailed out something so people were informed about what it was we were talking about. And in a lot of cases, this is people's reaction to it. The council is more to be able to interpret it. But there is some good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand that. I have some people responding, it's not giving us a real true picture of
It's even their understanding of the issues. But that, notwithstanding that, that's important data, because that's what the average person is thinking.
Yeah. We have to read these and then we have to interpret them, or we've wasted their time by sending it out. So what I'm giving now is my opinion, these results.
That's great, that's great.
So, and I also found it interesting too, I think it was mentioned earlier, that active transportation came in 10th out of 19 questions, 19 places. So I thought that was interesting. Anyway, there's a number of things here that I think gives a highlight. It by no means is the full involvement of the community, but I'm looking forward to the 5.5 as well. And looking forward to see where we can maybe get creative about revenue sources and get created a
Unless you had a list going. The next I saw was Councillor Mah.
Thank you. I respect that we all bring different perspectives to our roles here. And as council, I see ourselves as a board that sets strategic direction and makes high level decisions. My